All right. The Theodore Roosevelt Inaugural Site in Buffalo, New York is delighted that we've been able to continue our monthly Speaker Night series during the pandemic thanks to the magic of Zoom. Speaker Night is our opportunity on the fourth Tuesday of most months to invite experts to help us think about interesting topics. Some of those topics relate directly to Theodore Roosevelt, or as we'll see tonight, the history of Buffalo. We couldn't do this without the generous support of our sponsors, M&T Bank, as well as the New York State Council on the Arts. We also very much appreciate you, our virtual audience, for being a part of tonight's program. With that, I am delighted to turn things over to this evening's speaker, Rick Falkowski, who will tell you a little bit about himself and quite a bit about all of the in-depth research he has conducted into Buffalo's 19th century influencers. Rick, thank you so much for being with us, and I'm looking forward to your presentation, as I'm sure everyone else is.
Hey, thank you very much, Lenore, and everyone that's joined the site. I'm honored to be invited to give this presentation as part of the Theodore Roosevelt Inaugural Site Speaker Series. Tonight's talk will be about people who were influential in the development of Buffalo, New York during the 1800s. I was looking forward to giving this talk at the facility, but as Lenore was saying, due to the new reality created by COVID-19, this virtual presentation is the platform for today's event. My background's in the entertainment industry. In addition to being a performer, I've worked in all aspects of the music and entertainment industry for over 50 years. I published Buffalo Backstage Magazine. I created the Buffalo Music Awards. I'm the founder of the Buffalo Music Hall of Fame, author of the book History of Buffalo Music and Entertainment. I coordinate the concerts at Tonawonda's Gateway Harbor Park. Well, not this summer, but I normally coordinate them. And I'm a Time Warner retiree. Therefore, the orientation of my presentation is slanted more towards entertainment than towards academics. So I hope tonight's presentation, it'll be more like a talk by Mark Twain than a lecture by Charles Darwin. My book, which you can see on the slide right now, Historic and Influential People from Buffalo and Western New York, the 1800s, profiles 100 people from Western New York that contributed to local, regional, and national history, commerce, and culture. All the individuals in that book were influential, and all 100 deserve to be included in this talk. But tonight, I'm going to focus on the people who were influential in shaping the development of our city, which at the turn of the century was the 8th largest city in the United States, a center of industry and transportation, the home to more millionaires per capita than any other American city. It was graced by mansions designed by celebrated architects, and the park system was created by Frederick Law Olmsted. Buffalo was selected to usher in the 1900s by hosting the Pan American Exhibition. And one of the mansions on Delaware Avenue's Millionaire Row was the Theodore Roosevelt Inaugural National Historic Site, the origin of tonight's talk. In my talks and books, I always have 3 objectives. Number 1, to remind you about things that you have forgotten. Number 2, to inform you about things that you did not know. And number 3, to make you proud to be from Buffalo and Western New York. Keep these 3 goals in mind during the progression of this presentation. The French were the first European power in the Western New York area. LaSalle arrived in December of 1678 with Father Hennepin. He was the first European to write about Niagara Falls. Now, when he saw the falls on December 8th of 1678, there was twice as much water going over the falls as there is today, because now 1/2 of the water is siphoned off for hydroelectric power. In early 1679, LaSalle started building Le Griffin on Cayuga Island, which was south of Niagara Falls, above the falls. It was launched in May, but due to the Niagara River currents, the ship did not enter Lake Erie until August. It was the first sailing ship on the Western Great Lakes, but Le Griffin was lost on its first voyage. The wreck was never found. 3 separate people, the father and 2 sons, were called Joncaire. Thomas the father arrived in North America in 1687, and he was immediately captured by the Senecas. When he was about to be tortured, he punched a Seneca chief in the face, breaking his nose. This gained the Senecas' respect, and Thomas was adopted as a member of the Seneca, and he learned their language. He founded a trading post in Lewiston in 1719, now in the grounds of Art Park. And in 1726, he obtained permission to build the House of Peace, which became the French castle at Fort Niagara. In 1750, Daniel, his youngest son, replaced the father as the portage master, transporting goods around Niagara Falls. He built Little Fort Niagara above the falls. The stone chimney that you see when you're driving towards the falls right now still exists, and that was part of the building. In 1758, he built the first white settlement at Buffalo Creek. It was quite large, with several buildings and cultivated fields. This was located at the current site of the General Mills plant. When the French lost Fort Niagara in 1759, that ended French control in Western New York and the Niagara Peninsula. The British did not have any settlements in Western New York until they won the French and Indian War and took over control of Fort Niagara. In the pictures here, you can see Fort Erie. The English built Fort Erie on the Lake Erie side of the Niagara River, but they built it close to the water, and it kept getting destroyed by the winter ice storm, those Buffalo winters. They had to keep moving it up the hill 3 different times until it was finally rebuilt where it stands today and doesn't get affected by the winter storms. The Portage, established by the French, was continued around the falls from Lewiston to Fort Slocer by the British. But British policy was responsible for the Devil's Hole Massacre, which was led by Seneca warrior Farmer's brother. During the French and Indian War in 1755, Farmer's brother actually fought for the British. Cornplanter appointed him to lead a 300 warrior force during Pontiac's Rebellion, which was an attempt to drive the British out of the Great Lakes area. He burned 3 British forts in Pennsylvania, including Erie, Pennsylvania, and on September 14th of 1763, he led Devil's Hole Massacre. He attacked John Stedman's wagon train while it was transporting goods on the Portage and forced them into Niagara Gorge. British troops who heard the commotion came to the rescue, but they were all killed. The British lost 21 Teamsters and 81 soldiers. To show you how good of a warrior Farmer's brother was, the Seneca only had 1 warrior wounded. Due to his exploits as a warrior, he led the Seneca fighting in the War of 1812, even though he was 80 or possibly 100 years old. He got his name after listening to a speech by George Washington in 1792. Washington told the Seneca that being a farmer was an honorable profession. Washington said he was a farmer himself, and he referred to Farmer's brother as his brother. This made him adopt the English name of Farmer's brother. Red Jacket was the chief and the greatest orator of the Seneca Nation. He got his name because he was a messenger for the British during the American Revolution, and he took the name of Red Jacket that he adopted. In 1792, he was given a peace medal by George Washington, which he always wore. You can see that in the top right photo. And Red Jacket was a Seneca representative at the Big Tree Treaty in 1797. He didn't agree to giving up land and being moved to the reservations, but he was overruled by the other chiefs. Eventually, he agreed that concessions were required to work with the white man, but he argued for retaining Indian tradition, and he was not in favor of Christianity. This famous photo that you see on the bottom left is in 1801 when Red Jacket was accused of witchcraft by Handsome Lake and Cornplanter. To be accused of witchcraft in the Seneca Nation, the penalty was death if you ended up being found guilty. Red Jacket successfully defended himself with what was considered one of the greatest speeches, and he retained his position as chief of the Seneca. He's buried in a place of honor at the entrance of Forest Lawn Cemetery. William Johnson arrived at Fort Niagara in 1780. You can see a picture here of what the fort looked like in 1780, and was assigned as the British Indian agent to the Seneca at Buffalo Creek. When the British abandoned Fort Niagara after the French and Indian War in 1794, he decided to stay in Western New York. He married a Seneca, he built a trading post, and was given land by the Seneca, which included most of what became the entire initial village of Buffalo. He made an agreement with Joseph Ellicott and the Holland Land Company to make a trade for additional land in other parts of the Buffalo area, so the village of Buffalo would have access to the mouth of Buffalo Creek. Here's a chart which really shows the early residents of the Buffalo area. And Old Black Joe, who was a former slave, was actually one of the first settlers of Buffalo. And the slide shows the entire 1798 population of the area. But everything was about to change with the arrival of the Holland Land Company and when Joseph Ellicott started selling lots to settlers. Joseph Ellicott was a surveyor and agent for the Holland Land Company. He negotiated with William Johnson, changing the company's southern boundary from a straight line of William Street to the lake, angling it so the mouth of Buffalo Creek was included in the village. You can see that in this map here on the right. Then the reservation was south of Buffalo Creek. In 1798, he returned to survey the lands, and in 1800, he was named resident agent. And in 1803, he started laying out the city in inner and outer lots, which are outlined in the two maps that you can see on the left and the center. Ellicott picked out his own lot, 100 acres on Main Street from Eagle to Swan and all the way back to where Jefferson Avenue now exists. It is the large lot number 104 that you can see on two slides. But he never started building in this location. He moved his office to Asa Ransom's Tavern in Clarence and then to Batavia. As mentioned, Asa Ransom was one of the earliest settlers of Buffalo, arriving in 1797. That year, his daughter Sophia was the first white child born in Western New York outside of Fort Niagara. In 1799, he moved to Clarence to take advantage of an offer of land at $2 per acre if he opened a tavern, which became the first inn outside of Buffalo in Western New York. In 1799, his son, Harry Bolton Ransom, was born, and he was the first white male child born in Western New York. And in 1801, Asa Ransom became the first appointed public official in what became Erie County. His brother Elias also had a tavern in the area, which was 2 miles west of Williamsville. And his stepbrother, Timothy Hopkins, was the first supervisor of Amherst in 1819. The current Asa Ransom House, which you can see the photo on the left, is about a block from Ransom's original tavern. Captain Samuel Pratt and his family arrived in Buffalo in 1803. They brought the first carriage to the area. Prior to that, it was just people riding horses. Their store and home was built at Main and Exchange Street, which was later the location of the Mansion House, the photo on the bottom left. He owned a ferry and then a toll bridge going over Buffalo Creek to the South Towns. His son, Hiram Pratt, became mayor of Buffalo, while his son, Samuel Pratt Jr., continued the family tradition of store ownership. Samuel's sons were Samuel Fletcher Pratt and Pascal Pioli Pratt. They built the legacy of the Pratt family and were an example of the future Buffalo industrialists that were to come. Samuel formed the S.F. Pratt & Company, which when his brother Pascal joined in 1842 became Pratt & Company. It was one of the largest retail and wholesale hardware companies in the country. They had customers west of the Mississippi River. In 1848, Samuel and Pascal formed Pratt & Letchworth with William Letchworth, who later donated Letchworth State Park to the state. At their Pratt & Letchworth plant, they employed 1,800 workers at the Black Rock plant. Samuel also formed the Buffalo Gaslight Company, and Pascal formed M&T Bank with Bronson Rumsey. Interesting note, Pratt ancestors were among the founders of the Mormon Church, and Parley and Orson Pratt were both among the original 12 apostles. Parley was the church spokesman for the legitimacy of polygamy. He had 30 children, and it's estimated that he has between 30 and 50,000 living relatives, including his great-great-grandson, Mitt Romney. Cyrenius Chapin was the first doctor to practice medicine in Buffalo. In 1801, he led a group of 40 settlers who wanted to purchase the entire township at the mouth of the Buffalo River. But Joseph Ellicott turned him down because the lots had not yet been surveyed by the Holland Land Company. He returned again in 1803, but since the lots were still not available, he settled in Fort Erie, Canada. From there, he saw patients in Canada and the United States until he was able to finally purchase a lot in Buffalo in 1805. During the War of 1812, he was a colonel leading U.S. troops on raids in Canada. On December 30th, 1813, he tried to protect Black Rock, but the troops retreated. He set up a cannon at the corner of Main and Niagara Street to try to protect Buffalo from British attack, but the cannon broke down after several volleys, so he surrendered. Chapin was not the commanding officer of the Buffalo forces, so British General Ryle did not accept the surrender. But this delay did not save the city from being burned, but it gave the people time to escape. Note the map which shows the small size of Buffalo when it was burned. The village was only from Exchange to Chippewa Street and Franklin to Washington Street. Margaret St. John talked the British and Indians into not burning down her house during the Battle of Buffalo. On December 30th and 31st of 1813, it was the only residence that survived. After the attack, only two of the buildings were still standing, the jail and part of the blacksmith shop. The family was respected by the city of Buffalo for their bravery, and their home, with the drawing of it here, stood until 1871, when its location on Main, just north of Court Street, was then in the downtown business district of Buffalo. Erastus Granger was a friend of Thomas Jefferson, and when he arrived in Buffalo in 1803, he was appointed Superintendent of Indian Affairs, Collector of Customs at the harbor, and Postmaster. In 1810, he purchased a 700-acre farm 4 miles from the city. It was called Flint Hill. There he met with Red Jacket, farmer's brother and corn planter from the Seneca, to request that they stay neutral during the War of 1812. But when the Mohawks joined the British, the Seneca joined the Americans. The British never got as far as his farm when they burned Buffalo during the War of 1812, and the Flint Hill farm was sold by Granger's sons and became Forest Lawn Cemetery. William Hodge arrived in Buffalo in 1805, settling at Main and Utica. There he opened a tavern, which became known as Brick Tavern on the Hill. It was the first tavern where people could stay after leaving the city of Buffalo. There was an orchard in the lot behind the tavern, and with his next door neighbor, Abner Bryant, he planted elm trees on the west side of Buffalo. His son, William, developed and built many of the houses on Hodge Street, and of course, Bryant developed Bryant Street. The American soldiers camped near his tavern during the winter of 1812 and 13. That winter, 300 soldiers died. They were originally buried in the ground at Flint Hill, but due to the stone strata near the surface, arms and legs were sticking out of the ground after the snow melted. Daniel Chapin, who lived next to Granger, paid Hodge to make 300 coffins for the soldiers so they could be properly buried in the meadow in what is now Delaware Park. Their burial site is marked by this monument. The Hodge property was one of the furthest properties east of Buffalo that was burned. Many residents headed down Main Street to Williamsville. The Army regrouped in Williamsville, setting up barracks on what is now Garrison Road, and headquarters was in the Evans House. The military hospital was moved to a former barracks, and over 1,000 American and British soldiers were treated. A cemetery was built south of the hospital in Ellicott Creek, now in the Cheektowaga area. And just like at Flint Hill, most of the deaths were from dysentery and diarrhea, not from battle wounds. Benjamin Ellicott assisted his brother at the Holland Land Company. He bought 300 acres at $2 per acre, or $6,000 for the land bordering Glen Falls. That's about what I pay annually in taxes on my modest Williamsville home. He ended up getting all the Williamsville area for that. This land was sold to relatives Jonas Williams, after whom Williamsville was named, and David Evans. Neither Joseph nor Benjamin Ellicott married and did not have any heirs. They left their estates to their sisters, along with their sisters' children and grandchildren. Ironically, all three sisters married brothers from the Evans family. General Peter Buell Porter was a politician, War of 1812 politician, and a general during the War of 1812. And he was the voice of Black Rock to be the western terminus of the Erie Canal. In 1805, the mile reserve along the Niagara River was put up for sale. Peter and his brother Augustus purchased most of the land and got leases for Lewiston and Fort Slocia. They formed Porter Barton Company with Benjamin Barton. It was a freight forwarding company from Lake Erie to Lake Ontario during the Portage Road around Niagara Falls. Barton moved to Lewiston. Augustus Porter moved to Niagara Falls, which at that time was called Manchester, and Peter Porter moved to Black Rock. As a general during the War of 1812, he fought in many battles, and at the end of the war, he was named commander of all American forces in Niagara Peninsula. Fort Porter on the Niagara River, near the current entrance to the Peace Bridge, was named after him in 1841. In 1816, he built this house on Niagara and Ferry, which he sold to Lewis Allen. In 1836, Peter Porter moved to Niagara Falls. His grandson, Peter A. Porter, owned the Niagara Falls Gazette newspaper and the Cataract House Hotel. He was the family member that in 1885 sold Niagara Falls and much of the surrounding land, including Rhode Island, to New York State to set up the first state park in America. Benjamin Barton ran the Lewiston to Niagara Black Rock Portage Company with the Porters and was based in Lewiston, where he built this mansion, which still stands on the hill at the corner of Center and 3rd Street. William A. Byrd was a nephew of Peter Porter. He moved to Buffalo in 1820 and built this house at 1118 Niagara Street. When they were digging the cellar for the home, they found 12 skeletons in a kettle, each with a tomahawk in their skull. It was believed these were French explorers who went missing while traveling to Detroit in 1763. Byrd was responsible for building the Black Rock Harbor and laying out the streets of the village. With his uncle, Peter Buell Porter, he started the first railroad in Buffalo, which was called the Buffalo Black Rock Railroad. Originally, it had horse-drawn cars that only went as far as Black Rock, until Byrd replaced the horses with a steam engine and extended the tracks to Niagara Falls. After building ships for the U.S. Navy, Samuel Wilkeson moved to Buffalo during the War of 1812 and became the first Justice of the Peace in 1815. Wilkeson argued for Buffalo to be the western terminus of the Erie Canal, debating against Peter Porter, who represented Black Rock. He formed the Buffalo Harbor Company with Ebenezer Johnson, Ebenezer Walden, Charles Townsend, George Coit, and Oliver Forward. They removed the sandbar that blocked the mouth of the Buffalo River and moved the mouth of the river 1,000 feet south. This allowed ships to enter the river and resulted in Buffalo becoming the western terminus of the Erie Canal. He built his home, which you can see here, on Niagara Square, in what is now the location of City Hall. If it were not for Wilkeson, you never know, we could be living in the city of Black Rock. Dr. Ebenezer Johnson was the first mayor of the city of Buffalo. In 1809, he arrived in Western New York to practice medicine, but he did not know that Dr. Chapin had already set up a practice in the area. After treating wounded soldiers at the military hospital we mentioned in Williamsville during the War of 1812, he returned to Buffalo. He opened a drugstore. He invested in real estate. He built a grain mill and got involved in shipping and harbor development with Samuel Wilkeson. Together, Johnson and Wilkeson built the dam and toll bridge, which helped establish the Tonawondas, both the city of Tonawanda and the city of North Tonawanda. He was selected as the first mayor of the city of Buffalo in 1832. During the cholera epidemic of 1832, his medical education came in handy. He set up a hospital, issued a decree for immediate burial of the dead, and ordered a city quarantine, curtailing lake, canal, and stagecoach traffic into the city of Buffalo. Sound familiar? We're going through something like that now almost. He purchased a lot on Delaware from Chippewa to Tracy, where he built one of the first great mansions on Delaware Avenue. It was called Johnson Cottage. George Coit and Charles Townsend moved to Buffalo in 1811 and opened a drugstore at the corner of Swan and Pearl, which they sold in 1818 to enter the shipping industry helped build Buffalo Harbor, and they were the ones that completed the last section of the Erie Canal. Their quoit slip was an important harbor slip. It is now behind Templeton Landing. And the commercial slip warehouse that they had is now on the location of where the Naval Park Museum stands. The Wedding of the Waters Frieze, which you can see on the left, is on the outside wall at the Buffalo History Museum. It shows DeWitt Clinton with Coit Townsend and Wilkeson emptying water from Lake Erie into the New York City harbor. The Seneca chief barge, upon which Governor Clinton traveled the Erie Canal to New York City, was owned by George Coit. Coit House, which was built in 1815, the top right corner, was on Pearl Street, and in 1867 it was moved to Virginia near Elmwood. It is acknowledged as the oldest house in Buffalo. Ebenezer Walden was Buffalo's first lawyer. He arrived in Buffalo in 1806 by walking the 40 miles from Batavia to get here. He built the first brick house after the War of 1812 at Main and Eagle. It became the headquarters for General Winfield Scott and was later sold to stagecoach pioneer Bella Cole. He began purchasing land all around Western New York. He had land on what's the east side of Buffalo now that was called Walden Farms. And when a street was built through their property, it was named Walden Avenue. His home pictured here was at Main and Edward Street, and it was later the site of the Tech Theater. He ended up selling the North Street Cemetery land at Delaware and North to Lewis Allen. Part of his land that became Poinsett Barracks was sold to Joseph Maston, who then sold it to Ansley Wilcox, and it was the site of the Theodore Roosevelt inauguration. In 1823, he was named the first judge in Erie County, and in 1837, he was elected mayor. Millard Fillmore, the 13th president of the US, came to Western New York with his parents and lived in East Aurora. In 1821, he moved to Buffalo to teach at the Cold Spring School, which you can see there in decrepit condition in its later days, which was on Main Street near Utica. And he taught there while he was studying law in downtown Buffalo. Fillmore then built a house for his wife on Main Street in East Aurora, which you can see on the right. And it was located next to where the Aurora Theater now stands. The house was moved to its current location by Irving Price, where his wife used the home as her Fisher-Price Company design studio. Fillmore's first law office was across the street from the house that he built, and it was located inside of what's the current location of Vidler's 5 and 10. Fillmore's law practice grew. He ended up moving to Franklin Street in Buffalo and was elected to the House of Representatives. He was then elected vice president and became president in 1850 when Zachary Taylor died. As president, he established the White House Library and started the tradition of inviting writers and artists to perform at the White House. As a former teacher, Mrs. Fillmore began the policy of the First Lady being involved in education issues. After leaving office, he felt his prior home was not presidential, so he ended up buying this mansion on Niagara Square. That later became a hotel during the Pan American Exhibition and is now the site of Statler Towers. Some of the organizations he helped start in Buffalo include the University of Buffalo, the University of Buffalo Medical Center, the Historical Society, the Albright Art Museum, the Science Museum, the SPCA, the Buffalo Club, and the Buffalo Public Schools. Fillmore devoted his life to public service and establishing cultural, social, and educational institutions. He gets my vote for Buffalo's favorite son. Lewis Allen came to Buffalo in 1827. In 1829, he purchased 29 acres of land along Main Street. Every morning, he would walk his cows down a path so they could graze at Days Park. That path that he walked them down ended up becoming Allen Street. In 1833, he worked for the East Boston Lumber Company of Massachusetts. They purchased 16,000 acres on Grand Island at $6 an acre to cut down the white oak trees. This was part of the beginning of Western New York area becoming a very important lumber center. After the project was done, he bought 600 acres for his Grand Island farm called Allenton. He started a private club on Grand Island called Falconwood, which later became Beaver Island State Park. And in 1841, he restarted the Erie County Fair, which at that time was held on land behind the courthouse, which was on Lafayette Square. In 1837, he purchased Peter Porter's home on Niagara Street and lived there for 50 years. His nephew, Grover Cleveland, visited and told him he was going to move to Ohio where he could study law. Ellen talked to him into staying in Western New York and got him an interview with his lawyer. When his attorney told Cleveland there were no openings, the next day Ellen went to his attorney's office and said to him, "If you don't need my nephew, you do not need my law business." Of course, Cleveland was hired. He studied law at the firm and became a lawyer. He got involved in politics and was elected president of the United States. Since Allen was the county chairman of the Republican Party and Cleveland was a Democrat, they ended up parting ways over their political views. Allen never voted for his nephew in an election. Talk about party lines. This sounds worse than the current U.S. Congress. As discussed, Cleveland was the nephew of Lewis Allen, who talked him into remaining in Buffalo. He's the only president in United States history to serve two non-consecutive terms, being the 22nd and the 24th president. While serving in Buffalo as sheriff and mayor, and later as governor of New York, Cleveland built his reputation as an anti-corruption reform candidate who wanted to clean up government. However, he was not without controversy. Cleveland paid a Polish immigrant $150 to serve in this place during the Civil War. Imagine that happening with a candidate today. Being a bachelor, he lived in rooming houses and took his meals at taverns, eating rich food and enjoying takards of German beer. He put on a lot of weight and became known as Big Steve, his actual first name, to his friends, and Uncle Jumbo to his nephews. He's the only president personally responsible for an execution, pulling the lever for two hangings at Lafayette Square while he was sheriff in Buffalo. Fillmore was accused of being the father of a child born to Buffalo's Maria Cross Halpin, who she named Oscar Folsom Cleveland. Cleveland acknowledged that he was the baby's father, but he was the only single member of a group of men who were in the acquaintance of Miss Halpin. With the middle name of Folsom, the father may have been his best friend, Oscar Folsom, who was the father of Francis Folsom. After Oscar died, Cleveland was Francis's legal guardian, and Cleveland ended up marrying Frances Folsom at the White House when she was 21 years old, 27 years his junior. She was the youngest first lady in U.S. history. Due to the people from Buffalo bringing up the Halpin affair during the presidential election, Cleveland held that against the city and did not move back to Buffalo after his presidency, like Fillmore did. He died and was buried in Princeton, New Jersey. Benjamin Rathbun was the person that built Buffalo and then lost it. He arrived in 1819 and purchased Eagle Tavern stagecoach stop, working with Bellico to run the stagecoach line from Buffalo to Albany. In 1835, he built 99 buildings, which included the American Hotel, the jail, and the First Unitarian Church, which is the only structure remaining that Rathbun built. He also owned stone quarries, brick plants, grocery stores, and dry goods stores, employing over 2,500 people back in 1835. Many of these projects were built on speculation, and Rathbun overextended himself. His brother and nephew forged promissory notes over the names of prominent Buffalo residents. Rathbun was not involved with the forgery, supposedly, but he was aware of it. His brother and nephew left town, but Rathbun went to jail for forgery. He was even held in the jail that he built. General Bennett Riley was the fourth and final commander of Poinsett Barracks. He enjoyed his time in Buffalo. As the officers of the camp were welcomed by Buffalo society, they were invited to many functions, and 5 of his officers married women from the Buffalo area. After leaving Buffalo, he was the provisional governor of California. He He transitioned California from Mexican to American law, established law and order in all the gold rush camps, and then turned over the government to elected officials. Upon retirement, he moved back to Buffalo and built his home on Main and Barker Street. Joseph Maston purchased the former officers' quarters at Poinsett Barracks from Judge Walden for only $3,500. He converted it to a single-family home and moved the entrance to the Delaware Avenue side of the building. An example of past inequities that happened in the Western New York area, while Maston was mayor in 1843, he set salaries for male teachers at $600 a year and females at $200 per year. Where was the teachers' union? On a positive note, due to the growing Irish population, the first St. Patrick's Day was held at the Mansion House during his administration. Grain mills, the lumber industry, and transportation are what ended up making Buffalo an important city. Joseph Dart and Robert Dunbar were the inventors of the grain elevator. Their invention revolutionized the unloading of Great Lakes boats and helped make Buffalo the grain mill capital of the United States. Manual labor could only remove 2,000 bushels a day from a lake vessel, whereas the grain elevator could do a day's work of manual labor in 1 hour. Dart received the name recognition for the invention, but Dunbar made the money, designing grain mills around the world. William Fargo was the youngest of 12 children, and he left school at 13 years of age to deliver the mail so he could help support his family. Imagine it happening today. Right. In 1842, he arrived in Buffalo to work for the railroad, and in 1844, joined freight forwarders Livingston and Wells. In 1850, several freight forwarding companies formed American Express to transport goods to Chicago and St. Louis. The company was formed during meetings at the Mansion House on Main and Exchange Street here in Buffalo. In 1852, Henry Wells and William Fargo formed the Wells Fargo Company when American Express objected to expanding to California. They purchased the Overland Mail Company and operated the Pony Express until it was replaced by the railroad. His house, seen here on the right-hand side, when it was built, covered 2 city blocks, all the area from Pennsylvania, West Jersey, and Fargo Street. It cost $600,000 to build the home, which is over $12 million current dollars, and an additional $100,000 to furnish it, which is about an additional $2 million current dollars. It was 22,170 square feet, 5 stories high, had the first residential elevator in Buffalo, gold doorknobs, and wood from every state in the Union. When it was completed in 1872, it was the largest home in New York State, outside of New York City. Jacob Shulikov was trained in the tanning trade by his father in Germany. When he arrived in the United States in 1841, he did not speak English. In 1844, he moved to Buffalo with $800 that he had borrowed to open a leather shop on Mohawk Street. He began purchasing tanneries from Western New York to Chicago. He invested in flour mills, starting with the Frontier Mill at Black Rock, leading to him building mills in Niagara Falls. His business approach was purchase a business, make it successful, and sell it at a profit. In 1877, he purchased the Niagara Falls Canal Company at a bankruptcy auction for $71,000. It began producing electricity in 1882. Several electric companies were consolidated. And when Jacob Shulikov Jr. became president of the Niagara Falls Power Company in 1918, it had a current day value of over $1 billion. In 1884, Nikola Tesla immigrated to the US to work for Thomas Edison. He left Edison's employment to pursue his development of alternating current. Tesla joined forces with George Westinghouse, the inventor of air brakes for the railroad cars. The Westinghouse contract gave him generous royalties, which Tesla gave back after J.P. Morgan tried to manipulate the stock market and buy out George Westinghouse. Tesla's actions ended up saving the Westinghouse Company. Thomas Edison was the champion of DC power, while Tesla was the proponent of alternating current power. Westinghouse and Tesla's AC Power won the contract to provide lighting to the Chicago World's Fair in 1893 and the Pan American Exhibition in Buffalo in 1901. The harnessing of hydroelectric power utilized many of Tesla's patents, as you can see in the picture on the bottom right-hand slide. And the transmission of AC power went through this distribution building on the bottom left, which still stands on the Twin City Highway and Robinson Road in North Tonawanda. The first transmission of electricity was in 1896, and it powered the Buffalo streetcars 22 miles away. James Scatcherd began working in the Buffalo lumber industry in 1852, being one of the early contributors to making Western New York a lumber capital. His son John joined the company after graduating from college, and it became one of the largest hardwood lumber companies in the country. John was also the president of the Ellicott Square Company, and he gave hotelier Ellsworth Statler his start. When Statler opened a restaurant in the basement of the Ellicott Square building, it launched his career in the hospitality industry. William Gratwick was a lumber baron that expanded the Tonawanda lumber business. He purchased land along the Niagara River in North Tonawanda and used slag from Tonawanda Iron and Steel Company to extend the land into the river. His lumber yards employed 450 people on Tonawanda Island and along the river. H.H. Richardson's last commission was building the Gratwick Mansion on Delaware Avenue. Gratwick suffered from cancer and was treated by Dr. Roswell Park. His wife donated money to fund the Gratwick Research Lab, seen on the bottom right, which progressed to become Roswell Park Cancer Research Center. In 1852, Samuel Cornell moved the Cornell White Lead Company to Buffalo. Built his plant at the corner of Delaware Avenue and Virginia Street. It was one of the last factories built in that part of the city, and was replaced by the residential Midway row houses in 1895. His son, S. Douglas Cornell, continued the business. He built a mansion across the plant at 484 Delaware, and he added a theater on the third floor of his mansion. His son, Dr. Peter Cornell, attended plays there, and he left the medical profession to operate the Star Theater and manage Schubert's Tech Theater with John O'Shea. O'Shea, of course, invented the windshield wiper, and Peter became an early investor in Trico. Granddaughter, Catherine Cornell, observed plays at the house and her father's theaters. She later became known as the First Lady of American Theater. Aaron Rumsey walked from Vermont to Warsaw, New York to join his brother, who had opened a tannery. Aaron then opened tanneries in other Western New York towns, and in 1832, he opened a tannery in Buffalo. His sons, Bronson and Dexter, were raised at their father's home at Delaware and North, and in 1856, Aaron began purchasing land around Buffalo. Bronson purchased a block of Delaware Avenue from Tracy to West Tupper. It became known as Rumsey Park, complete with a lake and a boathouse, and was the gathering place or playground for affluent children living on Millionaires Row. In 1896, they sold Aaron Rumsey and Sons Tannery to the United States Leather Company, which brought $10 million to each brother, the equivalent of $275 current million. They invested in railroads, partnering with the Vanderbilts, banks. Bronson was the founder of M&T, and land. At one time, the Rumseys owned 23 of the 42 square miles that comprised the city of Buffalo, New York. They even leased the land where the Pan Am was held, with the stipulation that it be returned in the same condition it was when it was leased. And Mrs. Rumsey donated a portion of Delaware Park behind the art gallery to the city of Buffalo. John Albright moved to Buffalo in 1883 to supervise coal shipments to Buffalo and the West. In 1887, he started Ontario Power Company, which became Niagara Mohawk. He also purchased the Buffalo Bolt Company and moved it to North Tonawanda, where it employed 1,500 people. Albright worked with William Walker Scranton to move the Lackawanna Iron and Steel Company to Western New York. This was just before the Pan Am, and he was often accompanied by John Milburn, who was the president of the Pan American Exhibition. People thought they were looking for land where they could hold the exposition, but they were purchasing it for the steel plant, which in time became Western New York's largest employer as Bethlehem Steel. His mansion on West Ferry near Elmwood was built by E.B. Green with the estate landscaped by Olmsted. It was next to the Rand Mansion, which became Canisius High School. Albright donated $350 for the building of the art gallery, but unfortunately it did not open in time for the Pan Am. After President McKinley was shot at the Pan Am, he was brought to the Milburn Mansion on Delaware and West Ferry for recovery. During September of 1901, the government of the United States was conducted from the Milburn Mansion and from the Buffalo Club at 388 Delaware Avenue. McKinley died at the home on September 14th, a week after the assassination attempt, and the historic mansion was unfortunately torn down by Canisius High School in 1957. Anthony Wilcox became friends with Theodore Roosevelt when they served together on the commission to acquire the Porter family land, which formed the first state park in Niagara Falls. Roosevelt stayed at the Wilcox house when he visited the Pan Am and returned to it after McKinley was shot. His inauguration was to take place at the Milburn Mansion, but Roosevelt felt it was inappropriate because McKinley's body and his family were still at the house. The inauguration was moved back to the Wilcox Mansion, but no photographs were taken of the ceremony. This house was a gift from Dexter Rumsey when Wilcox and Mary Grace Rumsey were married. Many people that were involved with this property have been included in this presentation. The assassination of McKinley ended the Pan American Exhibition on a solemn note, and the Pan Am was not a financial success, but it brought positive attention to Buffalo and the Western New York area. Many of the organizers of the Pan American Exhibition continued their influence into the 1900s. Buffalo developed new businesses and grew with the steel industry, automotive plants, airplane manufacturing, and other industries. As I said at the beginning of this presentation, my objectives when giving a talk are for people to remember, learn, and have pride of where they are from. So I ask, were you reminded of things that you forgot? Did you learn new things about people from your community? And are you proud to be from Buffalo and Western New York? Thank you, and I hope to see everyone in sometime in the future. In person, I hope. And in the meantime, keep safe and stay well.
Thank you very much, Rick. Certainly a in-depth look at some of the very influential people in Buffalo during the 1900s. Quite the tour of that. I just want to remind the audience, if anyone has any questions, feel free to type them in the Q&A, which can be found on the bottom of your screen. In the meantime, I am going to send out a message in the chat if anyone is interested in finding a copy of Rick's book and seeing the couple of folks he might have not covered this evening. You can follow the link I just sent out in the chat and purchase a copy through Buffalo's own Talking Leaves books. That said, Rick, you know, as I was listening to this, and I'm gonna again confess right up front, I am not a Buffalonian, I am a transplant, and although I've learned quite a bit in the 20 years I've been here, you know, I learned a lot from your talk. I do remember when I first moved here, I spent a lot of time at Delaware Park, and I'm just curious, you mentioned all the soldiers that died and the marker in the park. Do we know the names of those soldiers, or are they just anonymous?
It's anonymous soldiers.
Wow.
And it's interesting, I've lived in Buffalo all my life, and I was never aware of that until I started doing the research for the book. That it was like the coldest winter, the winter of 1812, 1813, and most of the American soldiers were Southerners. And they weren't properly equipped. They didn't have winter clothing when they were here in Buffalo. And disease really is what killed most of these soldiers. And they were, you know, camped out on Flint Hill, which obviously became Forest Lawn Cemetery. And then Daniel Chapin ended up paying Hodge to build all the coffins so they could be buried inside of that spot in Delaware Park. And I never knew it was there. In fact, then I found the stone that ended up marking it. But when it was originally built, there were 2 cannons on each side of the stone. And my wife grew up on the Upper West Side, and she said she remembers when she was young going to Delaware Park and sitting on the cannons and not even have any idea what it was. It's something that was never really talked about. And I found when I give talks and everything, not a lot of people are totally aware of the fact that, 300 American heroes are buried anonymously inside of Delaware Park right here in Buffalo.
Yeah, I again, when I was first moved to the city, I remember seeing it, but I was never sure if they just didn't list the names or if we didn't know them. So interesting. Another thing I was intrigued by in your talk was your description of, I believe it was the Fargo Mansion that you said, I think was the largest house in New York State at one point, and gold doorknobs and the first elevator and all of those things. Sounds amazing, but what ended up happening to that?
Well, after he ended up passing away, his wife tried living there and his family, but with that cost of trying to keep something like that up, it was like totally impossible. And it ended up just sitting dormant for a number of years, and it was torn down, and it's now like 4 separate blocks in a lot of the houses that you have on the west side area of Buffalo. And it surprised me because I always knew that Fargo was from Buffalo, but I didn't realize that he formed Wells Fargo Company right here in Buffalo. And then he also formed the American Express Company in Buffalo. I never thought of that. I considered them things that happened in New York or San Francisco, with Wells Fargo and the gold rush and everything like that. But somebody that lived in Buffalo and the companies were formed right here.
Well, that is one thing I've definitely figured out since I moved here, that Buffalo has connections to everything. It certainly seems that way. One question we had: do you see any common characteristics or any commonalities among the people you've researched? Anything that really stands out that kind of shows up again and again?
Most of the people that did stuff in the Buffalo area ended up coming from the New England area. And I was wondering, why is that? And then truthfully, when Buffalo was becoming a city, Buffalo was really the westernmost part at one time of the United States. You couldn't go any further than Buffalo. So all these people from New England were coming there. And one commonality amongst all the people is they were self-made men. Very few of them ended up coming to the area with money in their pocket. Like I mentioned, Shulovkov came here with $800 or whatever that he had borrowed. And, they didn't have a lot when they came here, but they ended up building everything themselves, on their own, and created, family empires, you could say, dynasties in the Western New York area. It was also interesting that so many of the people were interrelated by friendship and marriage. Like I mentioned that you had the Rumsey Park, where it was the playground for the kids that lived on all the mansions on Delaware Avenue. Friendships that were formed by those children ended up remaining with them for the rest of their life. And many of the families intermarried and kept, you could say, being successful in the Western New York area.
Well, I think there's still a lot of interconnections in Buffalo. It's a bigger city, certainly, but it always amazes me, the different connections. Interesting. We do have a question from one of our folks in our audience. Other than the house that wasn't burned by the Indians or British, were there other women in Buffalo who had similar roles of importance as an influencer back then?
Are you talking during the War of 1812? The woman that lived across the street from the house that remained, I believe her name was Lovejoy. She was the only female that was killed during the War of 1812, and her house ended up becoming the site of the Tift Mansion. And one thing I found, like you talked about people from the 1800s, is very seldom did you find things that females did during the 1800s. Many a time a female was Mrs. John Smith. She wasn't Mary Smith. And I made a point when I was writing my book to find as much about females as I could. And I covered, I believe 10 different important females within the Western New York area during the 1800s, which I found enlightening, and finding all the people that did things.
All right. I know, you're typically, you're told you're here, you're not supposed to have favorites, but, did you have any favorite stories as you were going through and researching your book?
I got a favorite person, and that was Samuel Wilkeson. Wilkeson did so much, in making the city the city, that it's a name that I didn't know about. And he was like the first judge of the area. His house ended up being where, City Hall is now stands. And after his house was torn down, it was funny, it was a gas station there. It was the first gas station in the Western New York area. And then ended up then building City Hall in the place of where it was, and that was Wilkeson. And favorite stories, I wasn't aware of like all the fighting between Buffalo and Black Rock as for what was going to become the western terminus of the Erie Canal, and how important the Erie Canal ended up being for the development of, all of the country, in fact, because everything west of Buffalo ended up having the opportunity to prosper because of Buffalo having the Erie Canal and reducing the transportation costs. So if I have a favorite story, it would be the overall story of how important Buffalo really was, how Buffalo was the 8th largest city and was growing and growing and growing. And then unfortunately, other places became more important. There's many different circumstances with the St. Lawrence, why Buffalo ended up losing, being the main city, but we were like in New York or Chicago. Buffalo is a very, very important place. And what I find interesting today is Buffalo's going back to being that. Buffalo is becoming a place that people want to go to because we've kept a lot of our architecture. And there's so much history in Buffalo when you start looking into it, that Buffalo's a fantastic place. Now I know why I left when I went into service and came back. In fact, both of my sons ended up leaving Western New York and they came back to Buffalo. Why? It's a great place to live.
Well, I would agree with that. So,
Well,
I
giving this
certainly
talk
have found it to be, and
giving this talk was different because I'm totally used to ad-libbing the whole thing. I'm not a rigging person. Having been in entertainment all my life, I'm used to playing off an audience. So right now I'm just looking at a screen and I don't have an audience that I'm working off of, so this was a very difficult endeavor for me. I feel more comfortable in front of 3,000 people than just a television screen.
Well, 3,000 people these days would be get us in all sorts of trouble. So we certainly appreciate you adapting to the times, as we all are, I think, still working on doing. I appreciate all of your insights and all of your research into some of these 19th century important Buffalo folks. I know I learned a couple things. Hopefully, those folks in our audience who are from Buffalo, as you say, were reminded of a few things as well. I don't see any other questions in the Q&A. So I think we're wrapping up for the evening. Again, I really appreciate your time, Rick, and your expertise. I want to thank everyone who is joining us virtually. And I do want to mention, though, before we leave, looking ahead, for those of you in the audience, our next speaker night is going to be the 4th Tuesday of September, and that is September 22nd. And the TR Site is really excited to be welcoming back Dahlia Muller from the University of Buffalo, and she is going to be doing her talk, When Past is Prologue, the United States and Latin America. So it's going to be kind of a look at, TR has a lot to do with this, and it's going to be a very interesting talk. We will have information on our website, and everyone who attended will actually, in the follow-up email, will have a link to register for that. So I do want to mention that is coming up. But again, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Rick, and thank you everyone who is here. I hope we will see everyone next month as well. So good night, everyone. We'll see you later.
Night.
Thank you, Rick. And everyone can just leave the meeting at the bottom left, or bottom right, excuse me.